With these YouTube episodes, I won't be going into creative systems theory and its multiple patterning concepts, at least in any detail. For that, you can turn to my books, in particular the book Creative Systems Theory, or some of the longer articles on the Cultural Maturity blog, culturalmaturityblog.net. But a few particular insights from the theory help highlight the power of the kind of understanding that becomes possible with cultural maturity's cognitive reordering. For many people watching these episodes, these further reflections will not be of great interest, but others may find them of particular value. No topic more directly relates to creative systems theory's more complete picture of reality's workings than that of intelligence. The theory emphasizes that what we perceive to be true is always as much a function of how we understand as what there is there to understand. And intelligence is what we understand with. This kind of recognition takes on a whole new level of significance with cultural maturity's cognitive reordering. In a previous episode, I described how integrative meta-perspective involves at once more fully stepping back from and more deeply engaging the whole of our cognitive complexity. Intelligence's multiple aspects provides one of the best ways to think about that complexity. The recognition that intelligence involves more than just our rationality has been framed in a variety of ways throughout the last century. But creative systems theory's framing of intelligence's multiplicity proves particularly useful for understanding what our times ask of us. It clarifies how intelligence, along with our rationality, includes more emotional, imaginal, and bodily aspects. It also describes how these various intelligences work together to make us the tool-making, meaning-making, we could say simply creative beings that we are. Creative systems theory argues that understanding most anything about us with real depth requires drawing on all of intelligence's multiple aspects. Attempting to make sense of intelligence's multiple parts played a key early role in my thinking. At that time, the fact that intelligence had multiple aspects was only beginning to be appreciated. I recognized that creative processes drew on a variety of different ways of knowing and did so in different ways at different points along the way. I also recognized that I would need to give some special attention to intelligence's more imagination, symbol-making, and more kinesthetic bodily aspects. At that time in culture, these more creatively germinal aspects of intelligence tended to be particularly foreign to people. If people are conscious of such sensibilities at all, they tend not to think of them as intelligence. Important insights came to me during this time of initial reflection on intelligence and its workings. Early on, my primary interest lay specifically with creative process, but as I was introduced in my training to developmental psychology, and in particular to more systemic developmental thinkers like Jean Piaget and Lawrence Kohlberg, it became clear to me that a similar intelligence-related progression worked beneath the surface with our personal formative stories. A surprising recognition that we see a similar cognitive progression with culture's story came soon thereafter, and with it the development of creative systems theory. Work I later did with Joseph Campbell, one of our time's most sophisticated chroniclers of myth and symbol through history, helped fill up my understanding of the role of intelligence's more germinal aspect in culture as a creative process. Cultural maturity's cognitive changes invite us to step back and engage intelligence with a newly systemic completeness. Mature systemic perspective requires that we apply our intelligence in the rational sense, indeed that we do so with new precision, but it also necessarily engages other aspects of intelligence. culturally mature understanding, consciously bridges facts with feelings, the workings of the imagination with more practical consideration, observation of the mind with things only our bodies can know. And it requires that we consciously draw on the whole of ourselves as cognitive systems. The recognition that we encounter a related, more integrative dynamic with personal maturity helps put an exclamation point on the importance of these changes. We associate the best of thinking in our later years not just with knowledge, but with wisdom. Knowledge can be articulated quite well by the intellect alone. Wisdom, however, requires a more fully embodied kind of intelligence, one that draws on all of who we are. Wisdom results not just because we better include all aspects of our questions, but also because when seeking answers, we don't leave out essential parts of ourselves. We draw on all of ourselves as cognitive systems. If the concept of cultural maturity is correct, we should expect an analogous result at a species level, and it is essential that we do. The future will require something beyond just being smarter in the decisions we make. Given the magnitude of the choices we confront and the potential consequences if we choose poorly, it is essential that our decisions be not just intelligent, but wise. Creative systems theory's particular framing of intelligence's multiplicity proves especially powerful when it comes to application. After pointing out that our tool-making nature means that human intelligence must at least effectively support formative process, creative systems theory goes on to describe how our human intelligence is specifically structured to drive and support creative change. The theory proposes that we are the uniquely creative creatures that we are, not just because we are conscious, but because of the particular ways the various aspects of intelligence work and the ways in which they interrelate. It describes how our various intelligences, or we might say sensibilities, to better reflect all they encompass, relate in specifically creative ways. And it goes on to delineate how different ways of knowing and different relationships between ways of knowing predominate at specific times in any human change process. It ties the underlying structures of intelligence to patterns we see in how human systems change, thereby both helping us better understand change and hinting at the possibility that we might better predict change. Creative systems theory identifies 4 basic types of intelligence. For ease of conversation, we can refer to them here as the intelligence of the body, the imagination, the emotions, and the intellect, though the theory uses fancier language. The theory proposes that these different ways of knowing represent not just diverse approaches to processing information, but the windows through which we make sense of our worlds, and more than this, they describe the formative tendencies that lead us to shape our worlds in the ways that we do. It argues that our various intelligences in the end work together in a way that is not just collaborative, but specifically creative. Our various modes of intelligence, juxtaposed like colors on a color wheel, function together as creativity's mechanism. That wheel, like the wheel of a car or a Ferris wheel, is continually turning, continually in motion. The way the various facets of intelligence juxtapose makes change, and specifically purposeful change, inherent to our natures. Let's look a bit more closely, starting with a simple creative act. With creativity's initial incubation, my sense of what I am going to create with anything creative is murky at best. The dominant intelligence here is the kinesthetic, body intelligence, if you will. It's like I'm pregnant but don't yet know quite with what. What I do know takes the forms of inklings and faint glimmerings, inner sensings, if you will. With creativity's next inspiration stage, where new form first becomes visible, The dominant intelligence is different. It's the imaginal, that which most defines art, myth, and the let's pretend world of young children. The products of this period in the creative process may appear suddenly, Archimedes, eureka, or they may come subtly and gradually. During the next stage, creativity's perspiration stage, where the hard work of creativity takes place, the dominant intelligence is different still, more emotional and visceral, the intelligence of heart and guts. It is here that we confront the more focused tasks of finding the right approach and engage in the most effective means of expression. With creativity's finishing and polishing stage, rational intelligence comes to have the more dominant role. This period is more conscious and gives greater attention to aesthetic precision than the periods previous. It's also more concerned with audience and outcome. It brings final focus to the creative work, offers the clarity of thought and nuance of style needed for effective communication. While we might easily think that the creative work is complete at this point, in fact, we are at best half done. We have yet to engage the dynamics that creative systems theory calls creative integration. With creative processes' second half, we step back from the work and understand it with new perspective. We become more able to appreciate the relationship of the work to its creative context, to ourselves, and to the time and place in which it was created. And specifically with regard to intelligence, we come to use our diverse ways of knowing more consciously together. We become able to apply our intelligences in various combinations and balances as time and situation warrant, and through this to engage the work as a whole and ourselves as a whole in relationship to it. One of creative systems theory's most radically and original contributions is the observation that we see a similar evolving relationship between cognitive sensibilities with formative processes of all sorts. This is similarly the case for any act of innovation, personal psychological development, the growth of a relationship or an organization, or culture and its evolution. For example, the same body intelligence that orders creative incubation plays a particularly prominent role in the infant's rhythmic world of movement, touch, and taste. The realities of early tribal cultures also draw deeply on bodily sensibilities. Truth in tribal societies is synonymous with the rhythms of nature, and through dance, song, story, and drumbeat with the body of the tribe. In a similar way, we find the same imaginal intelligence that we saw ordering creative inspiration, taking preeminence in the play-centered world of the young child. We also hear its voice with the particular strength in earlier civilizations, such as ancient Greece or Egypt, with the Incas and Aztecs in the Americas, or in the classical East, with their mythic pantheons and great symbolic tales. And again, in a similar way, we find the same emotional and moral intelligence that orders creative perspiration, occupying center stage in adolescence with its deepening passions and pivotal struggles for identity. It can be felt with particular strength also in the beliefs and values of the European Middle Ages, times marked by futile struggle and ardent moral conviction, and today in places where struggle and conflict seem to be forever recurring. We also find the same rational intelligence that comes forward for the finishing and polishing tasks of creativity, taking new preeminence in young adulthood as we strive to create our unique place in the world of adult experience. And this more refined and refining aspect of intelligence stepped to the fore culturally with the Renaissance and the Age of Reason, and in the West has held sway into modern times. Finally, and of particular pertinence to the concept of cultural maturity, we find the same more consciously integrative relationship to intelligence we see in the seasoning stage of a creative act, ordering the unique developmental capacities, the wisdom of a lifetime's second half. And we can also see this same integrative relationship with intelligence just beneath the surface in our current cultural stage in the West, in the advances that have transformed understanding through the last century. We associate the age of reason with Descartes' assertion that I think, therefore I am. We could make a parallel assertion for each of these other cultural stages. I am embodied, therefore I am. I imagine, therefore I am. I am moral, therefore I am. And if the concept of cultural maturity is accurate, I understand maturely and systemically with the whole of myself, therefore I am. Cultural maturity proposes that the discussion you've had, just reading about creative workings, has been possible because such consciously integrative dynamics are reordering how we think and perceive. Creative systems theory argues that understanding most anything about us with real depth requires drawing on all of intelligence's multiple aspects. For example, with regard to the times in which we live, I've described how we confront a crisis of purpose. Too often, people find themselves wandering aimlessly with no real sense of direction in their lives. I propose that cultural maturity's changes work as an antidote to today's crisis of purpose. Just how they might relates directly to these changes that help us tap the full depth and complexity of intelligence's workings. Re-engaging emotional intelligence along with the rational helps us get beyond the looking out for number one assumptions of mass material culture and more deeply appreciate the role of relationships in our lives. Re-engaging imaginal intelligence with its language of image, myth, and metaphor helps us more directly experience existence as something generative and creative. And re-engaging body intelligence helps us experience more fully from the deepest levels of our living natures. In contrast to most conceptual notions, understanding any creative systems theory concept at all deeply requires drawing on all of intelligence's multiple aspects. Most obviously, this is true for the theory's patterning in time distinction. The theory proposes that understanding any developmental process, including history in terms of what creates significance, requires drawing on the whole of intelligence's multiplicity. But this is similarly the case with more here and now, what it calls patterning in space systemic concepts, such as the creative systems personality typology. The typology describes how individuals who choose to become artists, actors, teachers, engineers, scientists, or stockbrokers are different not just because their interests differ, but also because their cognitive structures reflect different preferences and balances within intelligence's multiplicity. Even the basic notion of cultural maturity makes deep sense only if we engage the whole of intelligence. Arguably, more consciously and fully engaging intelligence's multiplicity is what culturally mature understanding is most fundamentally about. And if we look at the skills and capacities that I've described becoming newly possible with cultural maturity's changes, we find that none of them can be understood with the intellect alone. Each requires all the crayons in intelligence systemic box either to make real sense or to be effectively made manifest. When we add creative systems theory patterning notions, even at this basic level, what I described is not so simple, but hopefully at least a bit I've been able to articulate how the results fits with the idea that the task ahead can be thought of as a needed new common sense. Again, as always, I invite your questions and thoughts.